The Alhambra Palace is an ancient palace, a fortress, and one of the most important edifices of stolen Islamic architecture in Andalusia. It was built by the founder of the Banu al-Amr state, the victorious by God, Abu Abdullah Muhammad I. Muhammad bin Yusuf bin Muhammad bin Ahmad bin Nasr bin al-Amr between 1238–1273 in the Kingdom of Granada during the second half of the 10th century AD. It is now one of the most important tourist attractions in Spain and is located 267 miles 430 km south of Madrid. The beginning of the construction of the Alhambra Palace dates back to the 4th century AD, corresponding to the 10th century AD, and some of its parts date back to the 7th century AD, corresponding to the 13th century AD. It took more than 150 years to build. Among the features of Islamic architecture that are evident in the palace buildings are the use of delicate decorative elements and geometric arrangements such as carpet decorations, the writing of Quranic verses and supplications, and even some praises and descriptions composed by poets such as Ibn Zamruk, surrounded by decorations made of colored plaster that cover the walls, and colored faience tiles with geometric patterns that cover the lower parts of the walls. In 2007, the Alhambra was chosen among the list of the 12 treasures of Spain in a referendum in which more than 9,000 people voted. Overview. The plateau on the left bank of the Hadara River, where the Alhambra Palace is located, extends from west-northwest to east-southeast over an area of 142,000 square meters, with dimensions of 740 meters 2,430 feet in length to 205 meters 674 feet at its widest point. One of the most prominent landmarks is the Casbah of the Alhambra, which is a fortress that occupies a fortified place on the plateau. The rest of the plateau is surrounded by a relatively weaker wall, with 13 towers, some of which are for defensive purposes. On a hill next to Alhambra, the Generalife's Garden is the garden of the Nasrid kings. It contains pavilions and corridors surrounded by beautiful gardens watered by canals and water fountains. Reason for naming. There is disagreement about why this prominent landmark was called the Alhambra Palace. There are those who believe that it is derived from the Banu al-Amr, the Nasrid tribe, who ruled Granada between the years 6 to 9897, 123 to 1492 AD, while others believe that the name goes back to the red soil that is characteristic of it. It has the hill that was built on it. Another explanation for the name is that some of the castles adjacent to the Alhambra Palace were known since the end of the 3rd century AD, corresponding to the 9th century AD. In the name of the Red City. History edit. There is no prevailing but God. One of the most famous inscriptions inside the Alhambra. In the beginning, the Alhambra Palace was only part of the city of Alhambra, or the Casbah of the Alhambra, which includes the governor's palace and the castle that protects it. The buildings of the houses of ministers and courtiers developed over time until they became a fortified royal base. When the Arab leader Abu Abdullah Muhammad I, also known as Muhammad bin Nasr, who was nicknamed the Red, after the color of his red beard, entered the rule of Granada, after the fall of the Almohad state, the people welcomed him with chants, "Welcome, O victorious one," and he answered, "There is no victor today, except God." This is the slogan written all over the red. 8. He created an impenetrable wall around the plateau on which the Alhambra castle was built. And inside this wall he built a palace, or the center of his government. The castle was called the Alcazaba Alhambra, and the Alhambra Palace became a part of it, and it became an important stronghold of Granada. In the late 7th century, Muhammad ibn al-Amr al-Ghalib Billah, the second Sultan of Granada, constructed the buildings of the new fort and the royal palace. Then his son Muhammad established a mosque next to the palace, which was later replaced by the Church of Santa Maria. Its construction was completed towards the end of Muslim rule in Andalusia by Yusuf I 13331353 at 733754 and Muhammad v. Sultan of Granada 1353-1391 and 75479 to AW. With an interruption between the years 760 and 763, during which he was deposed. About the rule, then he returned to it again to begin the second stage of his rule. The most important developments, and write most of the poems that adorn the palace. Its architecture and sections edit. The Great Basil Courtyard. It is preceded by the Pond Courtyard, or the large rectangular Basil Courtyard, with a water pond in the middle and shaded by basil trees. In the corners of the courtyard of Al Rayyan were engraved the words victory, empowerment, and clear conquest belong to our Lord Abu Abdullah, commander of the faithful, and the noble verse victory is only from God, the mighty, the wise. At the southern end of this court is a huge Arab door. The buildings behind it were demolished, and only ruins remain of it. There are some inscriptions in these ruins, such as there is no victor but God and glory be to our Lord, Sultan Abu Abdullah al-Ghani, in God. The door to the northern courtyard of Al-Bayyan leads to a small hall called the Blessing Hall. The Hall of the Ambassadors, the hall that follows the Basil Courtyard from the northern side, leads to the Hall of the Ambassadors or the Hall of Comares, which is considered the largest hall in the Alhambra, and its dome is 23 meters high. This foyer has a rectangular shape. Its dimensions are 18 x 11 meters. Reconquista and Christian Spanish period. The last Nasrid Sultan, Muhammad XII of Granada, surrendered the Emirate of Granada in January 1492. Without the Alhambra itself being attacked, when the forces of the Catholic monarchs, King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile, took the surrounding territory with a force of overwhelming numbers. Muhammad XII moved the remains of his ancestors from the complex, as was verified by Leopoldo Torres Balbs in 1925, when he found 70 empty tombs. The remains are now likely to be located in Monge in the Principality of Lecern. After the conquest, the Alhambra became a royal palace and property of the Spanish crown. Isabella and Ferdinand initially took up residence here and stayed in Granada for several months, up until May 25, 1492. It was during this stay that two major events happened. On 31 March, the monarch signed the Alhambra Decree, which ordered the expulsion of all Jews in Spain who refused to convert. Christopher Columbus, who had also been present to witness the surrender of Granada, presented his plans for an expedition across the Atlantic to the monarchs in the Hall of Ambassadors, and on 17 April, they signed the contract which set the terms for the expedition, which landed in the Americas later that year. The new Christian rulers began to make additions and alterations to the palace complex. The governorship of the Alhambra was entrusted to the Tendilla family, who were given one of the Nasrid palaces, the Palacio del Partal Alto near the Partal Palace, to use as family residence. Ego Lepes de Mendoza y Quiones d. 1515, the second Count of Tendilla, was present in Ferdinand I's entourage when Muhammad XII surrendered the keys to the Alhambra, and he became the Alhambra's first Spanish governor. For almost 24 years after the conquest, he made repairs and modifications to its fortifications in order to better protect it against gunpowder artillery attacks. Multiple towers and fortifications such as the Torre de Siete Sulos, the Torre de las Cabezas, and the Torres Bermellas were built or reinforced in this period, as seen by the addition of semi-round bastions. In 1512, the Count was also awarded the property of Monge and subsequently passed on the title of Marquis of Monge to his descendants. Charles Vr. 15,161,556 visited the Alhambra in 1526 with his wife Isabella of Portugal and decided to convert it into a royal residence for his use. He rebuilt or modified portions of the Nasrid palaces to serve as royal apartments, a process which began in 1528 and was completed in 1537. He also demolished a part of the Comares Palace to make way for a monumental new palace. known as the Palace of Charles V, designed in the Renaissance style of the period. Construction of the palace began in 1527, but it was eventually left unfinished after 1637. The governorship of the Tendilla Manjur family came to an end in 17,171,718, when Philip V confiscated the family's properties in the Alhambra and dismissed the Marquis of Manjur, Jose de Mendoza Ibez de Segovia 1657-1734, from his position as Mayor Alcaide of the Alhambra. In retaliation for the Marquis opposing him in the War of the Spanish Succession, the departure of the Tendilla Manjur family marked the beginning of the Alhambra's most severe period of decline. During this period, the Spanish state dedicated few resources to it, and its management was taken over by self-interested local governors, who lived with their families inside the neglected palaces. Over subsequent years, the Alhambra was further damaged. Between 1810 and 1812, Granada was occupied by Napoleon's army during the Peninsular War. The French troops, under the command of Count Sebastiani, occupied the Alhambra as a fortified position and caused significant damage to the monument. Upon evacuating the city, they attempted to dynamite the whole complex to prevent it from being reused as a fortified position. They successfully blew up 8 towers before the remaining fuses were disabled by Spanish soldier Jose Garcia, whose actions saved what remains today. In 1821, an earthquake caused further damage. Recovery and modern restorations. Restoration work was undertaken in 1828 by the architect Jose Contreras, endowed in 1830 by Ferdinand VII. After the death of Contreras in 1847, it was continued by his son Rafael, died 1890, and his grandson Mariano Contreras, died 1912. In 1830, Washington Irving lived in Granada and wrote his Tales of the Alhambra, first published in 1832, which spurred international interest in southern Spain and in its Islamic-era monuments, like the Alhambra, an apartment of which he decorated in New England style. Other artists and intellectuals, such as John Frederick Lewis and Owen Jones, helped make the Alhambra into an icon of the era with their writings and illustrations during the 19th century. The Contreras family members continued to be the most important architects and conservators of the Alhambra up until 1907. During this period, they generally followed a theory of stylistic restoration, which favored the construction and addition of elements to make a monument complete, but not necessarily corresponding to any historical reality. They added elements which they deemed to be representative of what they thought was an Arabic style, emphasizing the Alhambra's purported Oriental character. For example, in 18,581,859, Rafael Contreras and Juan Pugner added Persian-looking spherical domes to the Court of the Lions and to the northern portico of the Court of the Myrtles, even though these had nothing to do with Nasrid architecture. In 1868, a revolution deposed Isabella II, and the government seized the properties of the Spanish monarchy, including the Alhambra. In 1870, the Alhambra was declared a national monument of Spain, and the state allocated a budget for its conservation, overseen by the Provincial Commission of Monuments. Mariano Contreras, the last of the Contreras architects to serve as director of conservation of the Alhambra, was appointed as architectural curator in April 1890. His tenure was controversial, and his conservation strategy attracted criticism from other authorities. In September 1890, a fire destroyed a large part of the Sala de la Barca in the Comares Palace, which highlighted the site's vulnerability. A report was commissioned in 1903, which resulted in the creation of a special commission in 1905, whose task was to oversee conservation and restoration of the Alhambra. But the commission ultimately failed to exercise control due to friction with Contreras. In 1907, Mariano Contreras was replaced with Modesto Sandoya, whose work was also criticized. Sandoya began many excavations in search of new artifacts, but often left these works unfinished. He restored some important elements of the site, like the water supply system, but neglected others. Like Mariano Contreras before him, Sandoya continued to clash with the supervisory body and to obstruct their control. He was eventually dismissed from his post in 1923. After Sandoya, Leopoldo Torres Balbs was appointed as chief architect from 1923 to 1936. The appointment of Torres Balbs, a trained archaeologist and art historian, marked a definitive shift to a more scientific and systematic approach to the Alhambra's conservation. He endorsed the principles of the 1931 Athens Charter for the Restoration of Monuments, which emphasized regular maintenance, respect for the work of the past, legal protection for heritage monuments, and the legitimacy of modern techniques and materials in restoration. So long as these were visually recognizable, many of the buildings in the Alhambra were affected by his work. Some of the inaccurate changes and additions made by the Contreras architects were reversed. The young architect opened arcades that had been walled up, re-excavated filled-in pools, replaced missing tiles, completed inscriptions that lacked portions of their stuccoed lettering, and installed a ceiling in the still unfinished palace of Charles V. He also carried out systematic archaeological excavations in various parts of the Alhambra, unearthing lost Nasrid structures such as the Palacio del Partal Alto and the Palace of the Abencerrages, which provided deeper insight into the former palace city as a whole. The work of Torres Balbs was continued by his assistant, Francisco Prieto Moreno, who was the chief architectural curator from 1936 to 1970. In 1940, a new council of the Alhambra was created to oversee the site, which has remained in charge ever since. In 1984, the central government in Madrid transferred responsibility for the site to the regional government of Andalusia. And in 1986 new statutes and documents were developed to regulate the planning and protection of the site. In 1984, the Alhambra and Generalife were also listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Alhambra is now one of the most popular tourist destinations in Spain. Research, archaeological investigations, and restoration works have also remained ongoing into the 21st century. Cyprus Courtyard. The pool hall leads from the right to Cyprus Courtyard. Next to it are the royal bathrooms, and the first thing that catches the eye is a spacious room with multicolored decorations, with gold prominent, then blue, green, and red, and in the middle of it is a small water fountain, and it is known as the waiting room. As for the bathrooms, they are flooded with lights, entering through chandelier-shaped niches, and their floors are paved with white marble. From the bathroom, one enters the combing and restroom, which contains many drawings strange to Islamic art. And the bathrooms are interspersed with small halls. Al-Akhatain Hall, located to the east of the El Baraka foyer. This hall was known by this name because its floor contains two equal and huge pieces of marble. Al-Sabah Hall, the Two Sisters Hall, leads from its southern door to the Al-Sabah Hall, the most famous wing of the Alhambra Palace. This pavilion was established by Sultan Muhammad al-Ghani Billah 755, A1354 ad 793, A1391 ad. It is a rectangular hall. Its dimensions are 35 m. In the middle of the lobby, the lion's fountain. On its circular marble basin are 12 marble lions, with water coming out of their mouths according to the hours of the day and night. The water outlets in this pond were disrupted when the Spaniards tried to discover the secret of the regularity of the water flow in the chronological way. It is worth noting that Islamic civilization used fountains to decorate public and private gardens, and the ingenuity of Muslim engineers in the 4th century or 10th century AD reached a great extent in making different shapes of fountains that emitted water in the form of a lily, and they were changed according to need to make water bubble in the form of a shield, and at times a specific period. and the effervescences of the Alhambra Palace and the Generalife's Paradise represent an advanced example of what Muslim creativity had reached at that time. Beni Siraj Hall, the middle of the southern side of the Sabah Hall, the entrance to the Sala de los Granadas Abencerrages. This hall has a rectangular shape. Its dimensions are 12 round marble fountain basin. Hall of Kings or Hall of Justice. To the east of the Hall of Sabah is the entrance to the Sala de los Reyes. The ceiling of the middle apse is decorated with images of 10 of the kings of Granada, crowned with turbans, whose features express dignity and pride. The first of them is Muhammad al-Ghani Billah. The last of them is Sultan Abu al-Hassan, father of Abu Abdullah. There are pictures of knights and hunting scenes. The Landraja view, to the north of the Sabah Hall, and the Two Sisters Hall, is the Mirador de Lindarada. Some of them interpreted this word as a distortion of 3 Arabic words Ain, Dar, Aisha. It is worth noting that Aisha was one of the queens of Granada in the 14th century AD. The word I means window. This hall consists of a small polygonal foyer. General design, architects, and poets. The design and decoration of the Nasrid palaces are a continuation of Moorish Western Islamic architecture from earlier centuries, but developed their own characteristics. The combination of carefully proportioned courtyards, water features, gardens, arches on slender columns, and intricately sculpted stucco and tile decoration gives Nasrid architecture qualities that are described as ethereal and intimate. Walls were built mostly in rammed earth, lime, concrete, or brick, and then covered with plaster, while wood, mostly pine, was used for roofs, ceilings, doors, and window shutters. Buildings were designed to be seen from within, with their decoration focused on the inside. The basic unit of Nasrid Palace architecture was a rectangular courtyard with a pool, fountain, or water channel at its center. Courtyards were flanked on 2 or 4 sides by halls, often preceded by arcaded porticos. Many of these structures featured a mirador, a room projecting from the exterior commanding scenic views of gardens or of the city. 589 buildings were designed with a mathematical proportional system that gives them a harmonious visual quality. The layout of the courtyards, the distribution of windows, and the use of water features were designed with the climate in mind, cooling and ventilating the environment in summer while minimizing cold drafts and maximizing sunlight in winter. Upper floor rooms were smaller and more enclosed, making them more suited for use during the winter. 90 courtyards were usually aligned in a north-south direction, which allows the main halls to receive direct sunlight at midday during the winter, while during the summer the higher midday sun is blocked by the position and depth of the porticos fronting these halls. Little is known about the architects and craftsmen who built the Alhambra, but more is known about the WNL or chancery. This institution seems to have played an increasingly important role in the design of buildings, probably because inscriptions came to feature so prominently in their decoration. Head of the chancery was often also the vizier, prime minister of the sultan. Although not exactly architects, the terms of office of many individuals in these positions coincide with the major phases of construction in the Alhambra, which suggests that they played a role in leading construction projects. The most important figures who held these positions, such as Ibn al-Jayyab, Ibn al-Khatib, and Ibn Zamruk, also composed much of the poetry that adorns the walls of the Alhambra. Ibn al-Jayyab served as head of the chancery at various times between 1295 and 1349 under 6 sultans from Muhammad II to Yusuf I. Ibn al-Khatib served as both head of the chancery and as vizier for various periods between 1332 and 1371 under the sultans Yusuf I and Muhammad V. Ibn Zamruk served as vizier and head of the chancery for periods between 1354 and 1393. Decoration. Carved stucco or yesra in Spanish and mosaic tilework zilj or zelij in Arabic alicatado in Spanish, were used for wall decoration, while ceilings were generally made in wood, which could be carved and painted in turn. Tile mosaics and wooden ceilings often featured geometric motifs. Tile work was generally used for lower walls or for floors, while stucco was used for upper zones. Stucco was typically carved with vegetal arabesque motifs. Atarique in Spanish, from Arabic, Romanized, al-torque, lit. Foliage, epigraphic motifs, geometric motifs, or sebca motifs. 104, 105, 106. It could be further sculpted into three-dimensional macarnas macrobes in Spanish. Arabic inscriptions, a feature especially characteristic of the Alhambra, were carved along the walls and included Quranic excerpts, poetry by Nasrid court poets, and the repetition of the Nasrid motto, Wa la ghalib illallah, Arabic, lit. And there is no victor but God. White marble quarried from Mekelle in Almeria province was also used to make fountains and slender columns. The capitals of columns typically consisted of a lower cylindrical section sculpted with stylized acanthus leaves, an upper cubic section with vegetal or geometric motifs, and inscriptions like the Nasrid motto running along the base or the top edge. While the stucco decoration, wooden ceilings, and marble capitals of the Alhambra often appear colorless or monochrome today, they were originally painted in bright colors. Primary colors red, blue, and in place of yellow gold, were the most prominent, and were juxtaposed to achieve a certain aesthetic balance, while other colors were used in more nuanced ways in the background. Inscriptions. The Alhambra features various styles of the Arabic epigraphy that developed under the Nasrid dynasty, and particularly under Yusuf I and Muhammad V. Jose Miguel Puerta of Elches compares the walls of the Alhambra to the pages of a manuscript, drawing similarities between the zilge-covered dados and the geometric manuscript illuminations, and the epigraphical forms in the palace to calligraphic motifs in contemporary Arabic manuscripts. Inscriptions typically ran in vertical or horizontal bands, or they were set inside cartouches of round or rectangular shape. Most major inscriptions in the Alhambra use the Nasrid or cursive script, which was the most common script used in writing after the early Islamic period. Thuluth was a derivation of the cursive script often used for more pompous or formal contexts, favored, for example, in the preambles of documents prepared by the Nasrid Chancery. Many inscriptions in the Alhambra were composed in a mixed Nasrid-Thuluth script. In the Alhambra, there are many examples of knotted Kufic, a particularly elaborate style where the letters tie together in intricate knots. The extensions of these letters could turn into strips that continued and formed more abstract motifs, or sometimes formed the edges of a cartouche encompassing the rest of the inscription. The texts of the Alhambra include devout, regal, votive, and Quranic phrases and sentences, formed into arabesques, carved into wood and marble, and glazed onto tiles. Poets of the Nasrid court, including Ibn al-Khat and Ibn Zamruk, composed poems for the palace. The inscriptions of the Alhambra are also unique for their frequent self-referential nature and use of personification. Some inscribed poems, such as those in the Palace of the Lions, talk about the palace or room in which they're situated, and are written in the first person, as if the room itself was speaking to the reader. Most of the poetry is inscribed in Nasrid cursive script, while foliate and floral Kufic inscriptions often formed into arches, columns, enjambments, and architectural calligrams are generally used as decorative elements. Kufic calligrams, particularly of the words blessing, baraka, and felicity, are used as decorative motifs in arabesque throughout the palace. Like the rest of the original stucco decoration, many inscriptions were originally painted and enhanced with colors. Studies indicate that the letters were often painted in gold or silver, or in white with black outlines, which would have made them stand out on the decorated backgrounds that were often painted in red, blue, or turquoise with other colors mixed into the details. Main structures. Entrance gates. The main gate of the Alhambra is the large Puerta de la Justicia, Gate of Justice, known in Arabic as Bab al-Sharia Arabic, lit. Gate of Sharia law, which served as the main entrance on the south side of the walled complex. It was built in 1348 during the reign of Yusuf I. The gate consists of a large horseshoe arch leading to a steep ramp passing through a bent passage. The passage turns 90 degrees to the left and then 90 degrees to the right, with an opening above where defenders could throw projectiles onto any attackers below. The image of a hand, whose 5 fingers symbolize the 5 pillars of Islam, is carved above the archway on the exterior façade, while the image of a key, another symbol of faith, is carved above the archway on the inner façade. A Christian-era sculpture of the Virgin and Christ Child was inserted later into another niche just inside the gate. Near the outside of the gate is the Pilar de Carlos V, a Renaissance-style fountain built in 1524, with some further alterations in 1624. At the end of the passage, coming from the Puerta de la Justicia, is the Plaza de los Aljabes Place of the Cisterns, a broad open space which divides the Alcazaba from the Nasrid palaces. The plaza is named after a large cistern dating to around 1494, commissioned by Higo López de Mendoza y Quiones. The cistern was one of the first works carried out in the Alhambra after the 1492 conquest, and it filled what was previously a gully between the Alcazaba and the palaces. On the east side of the square is the Puerta del Vino wine gate, which leads to the Palace of Charles V and to the former residential neighborhoods, the Medina of the Alhambra. The gate's construction is attributed to the reign of Muhammad II, although the decoration dates from different periods. Both the inner and outer facades of the gate are embellished with ceramic decoration, filing the spandrels of the arches and stucco decoration above. On the western side of the gate is the carving of a key symbol like the one on the Puerta de la Justicia. The other main gate of the Alhambra was the Puerta de las Armas, Gate of Arms, located on the north side of the Alcazaba, from which a walled ramp leads towards the Plaza de los Aljabes and the Nasrid palaces. This was originally the main access point to the complex for the regular residents of the city, since it was accessible from the Elbaic side. But after the Christian conquest, the Puerta de la Justicia was favored by Ferdinand and Isabella. The gate, one of the earliest structures built in the Alhambra in the 13th century, is one of the Alhambra structures that bears the most resemblance to the Almohad architectural tradition that preceded the Nasrids. The exterior façade of the gate is decorated with a poly-lobed molding with glazed tiles. Inside, a rectangular alphas frame. Inside the gate's passage is a dome that is painted to simulate the appearance of red brick, a decorative feature characteristic of the Nasrid period. 2 other exterior gates existed, both located further east. On the north side is the Puerta del Arrabal Gate, which opens onto the Cuesta de los Chinos, slope of the Pebbles, the ravine between the Alhambra and the Generalife. It was probably created under Muhammad II, and served the first palaces of the Alhambra, which were built in this area during his reign. It underwent numerous modifications in the later Christian era of the Alhambra. On the south side is the Puerta de los Siete Suelos Gate of 7 floors, which was almost entirely destroyed by the explosions set off by the departing French troops in 1812. The present gate was reconstructed in the 1970s with help of remaining fragments and of multiple old engravings that illustrate the former gate. The original gate was probably built in the mid-14th century, and its original Arabic name was Bab al-Gudr. It would have been the main entrance serving the Medina, the area occupied by industries and the houses of workers inside the Alhambra. It was also through here that the Catholic monarchs first entered the Alhambra. On January 2, 1492. Alcazaba. The Alcazaba or citadel is the oldest part of the Alhambra. Today, it was the centerpiece of the complicated system of fortifications that protected the area. Its tallest tower, the 26 meters 85 ft high Torre del Homenaje Tower of Homage, was the keep and military command post of the complex. It may have also been the first residence of Ibn al-Amr inside the Alhambra. While the complex was being constructed, the westernmost tower, the 25 meters 82 ft high Torre de la Vela, acted as a watchtower. The flag of Ferdinand and Isabella was first raised above it as a symbol of the Spanish conquest of Granada on January 2, 1492. A bell was added on the tower soon afterward, and for centuries it was rung at regular times every day, and on special occasions. In 1843, the tower became part of the city's coat of arms. Inside the enclosure of the inner fortress was a residential district that housed the elite guards of the Alhambra. It contained urban amenities like a communal kitchen, a hammam, and a water supply cistern, as well as multiple subterranean chambers which served as dungeons and silos. Nasrid palaces. The royal palace complex consists of three main parts, from west to east: the Mekshawar, the Comares Palace, and the Palace of the Lions. Collectively, these palaces are also known as the Casa Real Vieja, Old Royal Palace, to distinguish them from the newer palaces erected next to them during the Christian-Spanish period. Mekshawar. The Comares Palace was the core of a large palace complex begun by Ismail I in the early 13th century and subsequently modified and refurbished by Yusuf I and Muhammad V over the course of the same century. This new palace complex served as the official palace of the Sultan and the state, known in Arabic as the Qar al-Sultan or Dr. el-Mulk. The Comares Palace was accessed from the west through the Mekshawar. An internal façade, known as the Comares façade, stands on the south side of the Patio de Cuarto Dorado, courtyard of the Gilded Room at the east edge of the Mekshawar. This highly decorated symmetrical façade, with two doors, was the entrance to the palace, and likely served in some ceremonial functions. The Comares Palace itself is centered around the Patio de los Arianes Court of the Myrtles, a courtyard measuring 23 to 23.5 meters wide and 36.6 meters long, with its long axis aligned roughly north to south. At the middle, aligned with the main axis of the court, is a wide reflective pool. The pool measures 34 meters long and 710 meters wide. The myrtle bushes that are the court's namesake grow in hedges along either side of this pool. Two ornate porticos are situated at the north and south ends of the court, leading to further halls and rooms behind them. The court's decoration contained 11 qassid by Ibn Zamruk, 8 of which remain. Annexed to the east side of the palace are the Comares baths, or royal hammam that is exceptionally well preserved. On the north side of the Court of the Myrtles, inside the massive Comares Tower, is the Salón de los Embajadores Hall of the Ambassadors, the largest room in the Alhambra. It is accessed by passing through the Sala de la Barca, a wide rectangular hall behind the northern portico of the court. The Hall of the Ambassadors is a square chamber measuring 11.3 meters per side and rising to a height of 18.2 meters. This was the throne room or audience chamber of the Sultan. The Sultan's throne was placed opposite the entrance, in front of a recessed double-arched window at the back of the hall. In addition to the extensive tile and stucco decoration of the walls, the interior culminates in a large dome ceiling. The ceiling is made of 8,017 interlinked pieces of wood that form an abstract geometric representation of the seven heavens. The hall and its tower project from the walls of the palace, with windows providing views in three directions. In this sense, it was an enlarged version of a mirador, a room from which the palace's inhabitants could gaze outward to the surrounding landscape. Palace of the Lions. The Palace of the Lions is one of the most famous palaces in Islamic architecture, and exemplifies the apogee of Nasrid architecture under the reign of Muhammad V. Its central rectangular courtyard measures about 28.7 meters long and 15.6 meters wide, with its long axis aligned roughly east to west. The arches and columns of the surrounding portico are arranged in a complex pattern of single columns, alternating with groups of 2 or 3 columns, a design that was unique in Islamic architecture. 2 ornate pavilions stand at the east and west sides of the courtyard, while the center is occupied by the famed Fountain of the Lions. The fountain consists of a large basin surrounded by 12 stylized lion sculptures, all carved from marble. Along the rim of the fountain's basin is an inscribed poem composed by Ibn Zamruk. This praises the beauty of the fountain and the power of the lions, but it also describes their hydraulic systems and how they worked. 4 halls are arranged around the courtyard. The Sala de los Macrobes Hall of the Macrobes Macarnas, on the west side, was damaged in 1590 by the explosion of a nearby gunpowder magazine, and its ceiling was replaced by the current Baroque-style plaster vault in 1714. The Sala de los Reyes es Hall of Kings, on the east side, is subdivided into multiple sections covered by Macarnas vaults. Opening behind these are several more rooms, 3 of which contain rounded vault ceilings covered by unique pictorial scenes painted on leather. One painting shows a Nasrid sultan and other dignitaries sitting and discussing together, while the 2 other paintings feature scenes of sports, hunting, and court life. The style of painting was influenced to one extent or another by Christian Gothic art. On the south side of the courtyard, the Sala de los Abencerrages Hall of the Abencerrages derives its name from a legend according to which the father of Boabdil, the last sultan of Granada, having invited the chiefs of that line to a banquet, massacred them here. It is covered by an elaborate Macarnas vault ceiling, featuring a 16-sided lantern cupola in the shape of an 8-pointed star, possibly symbolizing the celestial heaven. On the north side of the courtyard is the Sala de dos Hermanas Hall of 2 Sisters, so called because of 2 large slabs of marble that form part of the pavement. Its original Arabic name was Al-Quba al-Qubar Arabic, lit. The Great Dome, suggesting it had a particular significance. The hall is covered by one of the most remarkable Macarnas domes in Islamic art. The Macarnas composition consists of at least 5,000 prismatic pieces, unfolding from the central summit into 16 miniature domes right above the level of the windows. To the north of the Sala de dos Hermanas, and access through it, is the Mirador de Linda Raja, a small projecting room with double arched windows on 3 sides which overlook the gardens below. The name Linda Raja is a corruption of Arabic Ain Dar Shah Arabic, lit. Eye of the House of Aisha. This small chamber has some of the most sophisticated carved stucco decoration in the Alhambra, and retains original mosaic tilework that features very fine Arabic inscriptions. The room is also covered by a unique vault ceiling consisting of a wooden lattice, shaped into an interlacing geometric motif, and filled with pieces of colored glass. Renaissance apartments and courtyards. To the east of the Comares Palace and the Palace of the Lions is an area of Renaissance-style Christian additions dating primarily from the 16th century. Directly north of the Palace of the Lions is the Patio de Linda Raja courtyard, originally an open garden area, but turned into a cloistered garden by the addition of new structures around it during the 16th century. The fountain at its center features a Baroque pedestal made in 1626 that supports a Nasrid marble basin installed here at the same time, although a replica now replaces the original basin, which is kept at the Alhambra Museum. On the west and north sides of the courtyard, along the upper floors, are 6 rooms constructed for Charles V between 1528 and 1537, known as the Emperor's Chambers. The most interesting details of the rooms are a marble fireplace, sculpted with the Emperor's coat of arms, and a ceiling of panels painted with pictures of fruits. The paintings were made around 1537 by Giulio Aquiles and Alejandro Maynor. To the west of the Linda Raja courtyard is the smaller Patio de la Reina courtyard of the Queen, located between the Emperor's Chambers and the Comares Tower. A gallery was built around the upper floor of the courtyard between 1654 and 1655. Further north is a tower known as the Pineder de la Reina, Queen's Robbing Room, formerly known as the Tower of Abu al-Juyush. This was originally a stand-alone fortification tower in the Alhambra walls that was probably built in the reign of Nasr r. 1309-1314, also known as Abu al-Juyush. Yusufi converted it into a small palatial residence with a lantern ceiling, and Muhammad V later added decoration around its entrance. Between 1528 and 1537, it was connected to the emperor's chambers. Via a new elevated gallery and an upper level was added to the tower around the existing lantern ceiling. Between 1539 and 1546, this upper floor was painted by Julio Aquiles and Alejandro Maner with mythological scenes. Depictions of Charles V's 1535 invasion of Tunis, and more formal classical-like motifs. Later, in 1618, Nasrid period columns and capitals from other palaces were integrated into the gallery, some of which were later moved to the Alhambra Museum. Partal Palace and Gardens. To the east of the Palace of the Lions and the Renaissance additions is the Partal Palace, a pavilion structure on the edge of the Alhambra walls. It was built by Muhammad II, which makes it the oldest surviving palace in the Alhambra. Today, although it has undergone many alterations since then, its south side has a portico and faces a large reflective pool, while a mirador projects from its north side over the walls. Next to it is a small but richly decorated oratory containing a mihrab. Beyond the Partal is an area of gardens stretching along the northern wall of the Alhambra. Several towers along this northern wall were converted into small palatial residences during the Nasrid period, including the Torre de los Picos Tower of the Pointed Battlements, the Torre de la Cautiva Tower of the Captive, and the Torre de las Infantas Tower of the Princesses. 189 For tourists visiting the Alhambra today, all these areas are accessible after passing through the main Nasrid palaces, although the palace towers are not normally open to visitors. Palace of Charles V. The palace commissioned by Charles V in the middle of the Alhambra was designed by Pedro Machuca, an architect who had trained under Michelangelo in Rome and who was steeped in the culture of the Italian High Renaissance and of the artistic circles of Raphael and Giulio Romano. It was conceived in a contemporary Renaissance style, or Roman style, with an innovative design reflecting the architectural ideals of this period. 194-195 The construction of a monumental Italian-influenced palace in the heart of the Nasrid-built Alhambra symbolized Charles V's imperial status and the triumph of Christianity over Islam achieved by his grandparents, the Catholic monarchs. It consists of a massive square structure of stone, which encloses a perfectly circular courtyard. The exterior facades are divided into two horizontal zones of decoration, with rustication below and pilasters alternating with other embellishments above. The two main entrance portals, on the western and southern sides, have designs resembling triumphal arches with engaged columns. The pedestals of these columns are carved with reliefs depicting allegorical scenes such as the victories destroying armaments, representing the emperor's imposition of a universal peace. The upper facade of the southern entrance portal features a Serlian window. Among the other details of the palace facades are a series of bronze rings or knockers, which are strictly ornamental, with more Hispanic symbolic imagery such as lion and eagle heads. Pedro Machuca had intended to create plazas with colonnades on the east and west sides of the building to serve as a grand new approach to the Alhambra palaces, but these were never executed. Construction of the palace began in 1527. After Machuca's death in 1550, it was continued by his son Luis, who finished the facades and built the internal courtyard. Work was halted for 15 years when the 1568 Morisco Rebellion began. Work was still unfinished when Philip IV visited in 1628, and the project was finally abandoned in 1637, leaving the structure without a roof. It was finally completed after 1923, when Leopoldo Torres Balbs began its restoration. Today, the building houses the Alhambra Museum, which holds objects and artifacts relating to the Alhambra's history, as well as the Fine Arts Museum of Granada, which houses a collection of paintings from Granada dating from the 16th to 20th centuries. Other Nasrid palaces. 3 other major Nasrid-era palaces once existed, but were largely destroyed over the centuries. The excavated remains of the Palacio del Partal Alto Upper Partal Palace, also known as the Palacio del Conde del Tendilla Palace of the Count of Tendilla, are incorporated today into the Partal Gardens. The palace dates from the time of Muhammad II, with later renovations and modifications, and is the oldest palace in the Alhambra of which traces have been found. The Palace of the Convent of San Francisco, Palacio del Convento de San Francisco, also known as the Palacio de los Infantes, is named after the convent of St. Francis, which was installed here in 1494. The Nasrid Palace here was probably first built by Muhammad II, but some surviving inscriptions suggest it was significantly remodeled by Muhammad V. Little remains of the Nasrid structure today, except for a rectangular courtyard and some of its adjoining rooms, including a richly decorated chamber with Macarnus vaulting. Queen Isabella I was originally buried here in 1504, before her body was moved to the royal chapel near the cathedral. The rest of the present-day building dates from an 18th century remodeling of the convent and includes a cloistered courtyard. Today, it serves as a Parador state-owned hotel. The Palace of the Abencerrages, Palacio de los Abencerrages, was one of the largest palaces in the Alhambra and may also date from the time of Muhammad II. Church of Santa Maria and the Alhambra Mosque. Located just east of the Palace of Charles V, the Catholic Church of Santa Maria de la Alhambra, St. Mary de Alhambra, which stands on the site of the former Alhambra Mosque, the congregational mosque of the Alhambra complex. The church was built between 1581 and 1618. It is under the authority of the Archbishop of Granada. The building was designed by architects Juan de Herrera and Juan de Uría and completed by Ambrosio Vico. Inside is a large Baroque altarpiece with gilded ornate columns, completed in 1671. Although the most impressive centerpiece of the altar, a sculpture of Our Lady of Sorrows depicting Mary holding the body of Jesus, was carved between 1750 and 1760 by Torquato Ruiz del Perol. Every year during Holy Week, this sculpture is taken out and carried in a procession through the streets of Granada. During processions, it is carried on top of a throne or platform that is sculpted to resemble the arcades in the Court of the Lions. Little remains of the Alhambra Mosque which stood previously on this site, aside from an ornate bronze lamp now preserved at the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid. According to an inscription on this lamp and to the writings of Ibn al-Khatib, the mosque was commissioned by Muhammad III and completed in 1305. The mosque's main axis was aligned towards the Qibla to the southeast, which also matched the alignment of the main street next to it. The structure consisted of a hypostyle hall with 3 naves separated by rows of 3 arches. The arches were supported by marble columns with capitals similar in style to those of the earlier Cordoban Caliphate period in the 10th century. The roof was made of wood and the central nave, which led to the mihrab, had a higher ceiling than the 2 side naves. A slender minaret stood at the western end of the building. After the Christian conquest, the building was converted to a church, but by the late 16th century it was in disrepair. It was finally demolished in 1576, prior to the construction of the present church. Baths of the mosque. One of the Alhambra Mosque's annexes, the Baths Hammam, has been preserved on the east side of the church today and is accessible from the main street. Like other Islamic baths, it provided general hygiene to the local residents as well as the means to perform the ritual ablutions ghusl for religious purposes. Although sometimes eroticized in romantic Western literature, visitors attended the baths strictly with members of the same sex and wore cloths or towels around their private parts. These baths were constructed under Muhammad III along with the mosque. They may have been partly demolished in 1534 before being incorporated into a residential house during the 17th and 18th centuries. The preserved remains were significant enough to enable their restoration and reconstruction in 1934. A smaller branch known as the Acequia del Tercio also splits off from it several kilometers upstream and proceeded along higher ground before arriving at the top point of the Generalife's Palace and Gardens. The main branch, proceeding along lower ground, also arrives at the Generalife Palace and supplies water to its famous patio de la Acequia. Both canals generally ran along the surface, but some parts ran through tunnels cut directly into the bedrock. After arriving at the Generalife, the canals turn towards the southeast and run past the gardens. They then join before turning back towards the Alhambra, where the water enters via an arched aqueduct next to the Torre del Agua water tower at the Alhambra's eastern tip. From here, it is channeled through the citadel via a complex system of conduits, acequias, and water tanks, albercones, which create the celebrated interplay of light, sound, and surface in the palaces. Historic furnishings and art objects. While the walls and rooms of the Alhambra are devoid of furnishings today, they would have originally been decorated and filled with many objects such as carpets, floor cushions, and tapestries or similar objects to be hung on the walls. The custom of sitting on the ground explains why some of the windows in the Mirador's lookout rooms were situated so low, where the eyeline of seated persons would be. Among the most famous objects from the Nasrid palaces are the Alhambra vases, a type of large Hispano-Moresque ware from the Nasrid period that were mostly found in the Alhambra. They stood on display in parts of the palace, probably in the corners of rooms. Their practical function, if any, is unclear, but they probably served as accessories to complement the architecture. They stood about 125 centimeters tall on average, making them the largest lustreware pieces ever made. They were shaped like amphorae, with narrow bases, bulging body, and narrow ribbed necks flanked by flat handles shaped like wings. They were decorated with Arabic inscriptions and other motifs, with the most common colors being cobalt blue, white, and gold. 10 vases of this kind have survived and began to be documented in the 18th century, making their way into museums afterwards. The earliest examples are dated to the late 13th or early 14th century, but the most elegant examples date from the late 14th or early 15th century. It is unclear where exactly they were produced, as there were several centers of ceramic production in the Nasrid kingdom, including Granada and Malaga. One of the best examples is the 14th century vase of the gazelles, now kept at the Alhambra Museum. It stands 135 centimeters tall and is named after the image of confronted gazelles painted on its body. Smaller jars and vases were also kept in niches in the walls and entrances of many rooms of the Alhambra. A niche set into the walls under an archway in the jambs, was a characteristic element of Nasrid architecture, where such jars were kept, possibly filled with water for visitors. Examples of these niches are found in the entrance to the Hall of Ambassadors. Another significant surviving object from the Alhambra is an elaborate bronze lamp that once hung in the main mosque, dated to 1305. The main section of the lamp is conical in shape, tied to a shaft or stem above, which is punctuated with small spherical sections. The bronze is pierced to create Arabic inscriptions in a Nasrid script and a background of vegetal arabesque motifs. After the 1492 conquest, it was confiscated and made part of the treasury of Cardinal Cisneros. It is now on display at the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid, although a replica is also kept at the Alhambra Museum. Influence in architecture. The Alhambra was often remembered nostalgically in some Muslim societies after the Christian conquest of 1492, and may have influenced later examples of Islamic architecture. For example, several monuments constructed by the Saadian dynasty, which ruled Morocco in the 16th and 17th centuries, appear to imitate prototypes found in the Alhambra, particularly the Court of the Lions. After Owen Jones published plans, elevations, sections and details of the Alhambra in London from 1842 to 1845, a fanciful, ornamental, Alhambra-inspired Orientalist architectural style called Alhambresque became popular in the West in the 18th–19th centuries. The style was later absorbed in the Ottoman world, in what Usama Makdisi called Ottoman Orientalism. The Alhambra also inspired a number of buildings in Moorish Revivalikitism. Wise Temple Synagogue in Cincinnati, Ohio. Villa Zareta Villa in St. Augustine, Florida. Villa Alhambra Villa in Malta (in literature). Parts of the following works are set in the Alhambra, Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra. This is a collection of essays, verbal sketches, and stories. Irving lived in the palace while writing the book and was instrumental in introducing the site to an international audience. Radwa Ashore's Granada trilogy. Salman Rushdie's The Moor's Last Sigh. Amin Malouf's Leo Africanus, depicting the reconquest of Granada by the Catholic monarchs. Philippa Gregory's The Constant Princess, depicting Catalina, the Infanta of Spain, as she lived in the Alhambra after her parents took Granada. Federico Garca Lorca's play, Dona Rosita, the Spinster, mentioned by title character Dona Rosita in her song or speech to the Manola sisters. Paulo Coelho's novel, The Alchemist. Ali Smith's The Accidental. George Bernard Shaw's play Man and Superman. Lizel Krishnahorkai's Sayobo There Below. Hanya Yanagira's A Little Life. In music. The plot of the ballet Roque entitled Zaid, Reine de Grenade, by the French Baroque composer Joseph-Nicolas Pancrace Royer c. 1705–1755, takes place at the Alhambra. Alhambra has directly inspired musical compositions, including Francisco Trega's famous Tremolo study for guitar, Recuerdos de la Alhambra, as well as Claude Debussy's piece for two pianos composed in 1901, Linda Raja, and the prelude, La Puerta del Vino, from the second book of preludes composed from 1912 to 1913. Isaac Albeniz wrote a piano suite, Recuerdos de Vialle, which included a piece called En la Alhambra, while his suite Iberia contained a piece called El Elbaic. Albeniz also composed an uncompleted suite, Alhambra, en los Jardines del Generalife, the first movement of Manuel de Falla's Noches en los Jardines de Spa, and other pieces by composers such as Ruperto Chap Los Nomos de la Alhambra, 1891, Tom's Breton, and many others are included in a stream referred to by scholars as Alhambrismo. In 1976, filmmaker Christopher Nupin filmed The Song of the Guitar at the Alhambra, which was an hour-long program featuring the legendary Spanish guitarist, Anders Segovia. British composer Peter Seaborn wrote an extended piano cycle steps, Volume 3, Arabesques 2008–2012, based on shared experiences of the Alhambra with his painter, Anton Seaborn. And a movement from his steps, Volume 1, is entitled El Suspiro del Moro, inspired by the legend of the expulsion of the last Moorish king of Granada. In 2000, Julian Anderson wrote a piece for contemporary chamber ensemble, Alhambra Fantasy. In pop and folk music, Alhambra is the subject of the Gimes song of the same name. The rock band Grateful Dead released a song called Terrapin Station on the 1977 album of the same name. It consisted of a series of small compositions penned by Robert Hunter and put to music by Jerry Garcia. A lyrical section of this suite was called Alhambra. In September 2006, Canadian singer or composer Lorena McKennitt performed live at the Alhambra. The resulting video recordings premiered on PBS and were later released as a 3-disc DVD or CD set called Nights from the Alhambra. The Basque pop group Mosque performed a song called Juntos en la Alhambra. Alhambra is the title of an EP recording by Canadian rock band, The Tea Party, containing acoustic versions of a few of their songs. Alhambra and AlDaheh are mentioned in the Emgo de Oz song named El Paseo de los Tristes from the album entitled Gaia 2. In mathematics, the Alhambra tiles are remarkable in that they contain nearly all, if not all, of the 17 mathematically possible wallpaper groups. This is a unique accomplishment in world architecture. M.C. Escher's visit in 1922 and study of the Moorish use of symmetries in the Alhambra tiles inspired his subsequent work on tessellation, which he called regular divisions of the plane. In film, Marcel L'Herbier's 1921 film El Dorado features many scenes shot in and around the Alhambra Palace. This was the first time permission had been granted for a feature film company to shoot inside the Alhambra Palace, and L'Herbier gave prominent place to its gardens, fountains, and geometric architectural patterns, which became some of the film's most memorable images. Animated films by Spanish director Juan Bautista Berasategui, such as Ahmed, El Príncipe de la Alhambra and El Embrujo del Sur, are based on stories in Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra. The Alhambra stands in for Baghdad in the 1958 adventure film, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Interior palace scenes, including in the Tower of Comares, the Court of the Myrtles, and the Court of the Lions, were shot at night so as not to disturb tourists. The Patio de los Aljabes, backed by the Alcazaba, standing in for a prison yard, was filmed by day. The Court of the Lions was depicted in Assassin's Creed 2016. When Sultan Muhammad XII surrenders the Apple of Eden, a powerful artifact, in the center of the movie plot, in exchange for his son's safe return. Both the Court of the Lions and Granada's El Basin are featured on the animated film Tad Jones, The Hero Returns. The fictional Broadway theater, The Interior, actually Auckland, New Zealand's Civic Theatre, in which Kong is displayed as the eighth wonder of the world in 2005's King Kong, is named the Alhambra. 2018 South Korean television series Memories of the Alhambra is based in Granada, Spain, with the Alhambra Palace as the backdrop of an AR game within the series. Many features and stories of the palace were used as clues and characters for the game progression, and AR Alhambra was depicted as a place of magic and Mecca for gamers to establish the gaming plot in the story. Layout. The Alhambra site is about 700,740 meters 2,3002,430 ft in length, and about 200,205 meters 660,670 f at its greatest width. It extends from west-northwest to east-southeast, and covers an area of about 142,000 square meters, 153,000 sq ft, or 35 acres. It stands on a narrow promontory overlooking the Vega or Plain of Granada, and carved by the River Darro on its north side as it descends from the Sierra Nevada. The red earth from which the fortress is constructed is a granular aggregate held together by a medium of red clay, which gives the resulting layered brick and stone reinforced construction tapial calicastrato its characteristic hue, and is at the root of the name of the Red Hill. The Alhambra's most westerly feature is the Alcazaba, a large fortress overlooking the city. Due to touristic demand, modern access runs contrary to the original sequence, which began from a principal access via the Puerta de la Justicia Gate of Justice onto a large souk or public market square facing the Alcazaba, now subdivided and obscured by later Christian-era development. From the Puerta del Vino wine gate ran the Cale Real Royal Street, dividing the Alhambra along its axial spine into a southern residential quarter, with mosques, hammams, bathhouses, and diverse functional establishments, and a greater northern portion, occupied by several palaces of the nobility, with extensive landscaped gardens commanding views over the AlDaheh. All of this was subservient to the great tower of the ambassadors in the Palacio Comares Palace, which acted as the royal audience chamber and throne room, with its 3 arched windows dominating the city. The private, internalized universe of the Palacio de los Leones Palace of the Lions adjoins the public spaces at right angles, see plan illustration, but was originally connected only by the function of the Comares baths or royal baths. The Mirador de Lindaraja, serving as the exquisitely decorated focus of meditation and authority, overlooking the refined garden courtyard of Lindaraja or Daraxa toward the city. The rest of the plateau comprises a number of earlier and later Moorish palaces, enclosed by a fortified wall, with 13 defensive towers. Some, such as the Torre de la Infanta and Torre de la Cautiva, containing elaborate vertical palaces in miniature. The river Darro passes through a ravine on the north and divides the plateau from the AlDaheh district of Granada. Similarly, the Sabica Valley, containing the Alhambra Park, lies on the west and south. And, beyond this valley, the almost parallel ridge of Monte Morer separates it from the Antequerela district. Another ravine separates it from the Generalife, the summer pleasure gardens of the Emir. Salmer Escobar notes that the later planting of deciduous elms obscures the overall perception of the layout. So a better reading of the original landscape is given in winter, when the trees are bare.